because his best friend couldn't get a smile out of him all those years, but a random thick booty hoe can. Hello, I'm Mia, an average no-life webtoon reader. We're gonna talk about the most popular, second most popular, romance webtoon. I'm going to give a full summary of the entire comic up to the point of me writing this script and then my review. If you want to skip to the review, go here. The summary will have spoilers because it's the entire story, so duh. If you are the author of Down to Earth or an associate, leave this video. There is no need to torture yourself. My opinion is exaggerated for dramatic and vaguely comedic purposes. It is my real opinion, but played up. I wouldn't say that this is constructive or worth watching unless you are a certified hater like me. Take all of my opinions with a grain of salt and read the story for yourself. I'm a random broke bitch on the internet and I am not the gospel of truth. All right, so let's get into it. Chapter 1 immediately introduces Cade as a huge asshole. He's rude at his job and somehow popular with women, which must mean he is good looking in universe, because he's shown no other redeeming traits. When he's done being awful at his job at Spencer's, he gets reprimanded by his boss for not being friendly enough and goes to meet with his girlfriend. His girlfriend, Ellie, breaks up with him and says he has no heart. Honestly, she read him for filth. Absolute queen shit. That's my girl. You deserve better, Ellie. He reacts like a jackass and then he continues moping. For a very split second, it seems like he might do some reflection, but then that's immediately discarded. He sees a green light outside his house and there are so many trees in his backyard. I'm like, where does this guy live? Like, does he live in the forest? How far from the city is he? Anyways. Upon checking what the green light and crashing sound was, he finds a floating, nearly unconscious, slim, thick alien girl. She falls into his arms and they both tumble inside of her spaceship. The alien girl gives him a peace sign, because she knows what that is, before falling asleep, and Cade screams as he realizes she is in fact an alien. He runs out and contemplates leaving her there, but remembers she's cute and goes back for her. Pretty privilege strikes again. Cade takes her back to his place and gives her first aid, which amounts to a bunch of random bandages all over her. She wakes up and tries to speak Glorp to him, but obviously they immediately realize the language barrier is a problem. She begins touching and poking at him as if she's super amazed to see a being that looks nearly identical to herself. So, sidebar, okay? I am so sick of inhuman beings being reduced to cat ears or glowing eyes. I want an alien to be a fucking alien. And I don't just mean physically, they can look more humanoid, but more importantly than that, I want to see their different alien values and cultures and beliefs and mannerisms. I want them to act otherworldly at the very least. Back on track. Alien girl touches him all over and then bumps foreheads with him. This is apparently how they transfer knowledge, so she can speak his language now. She introduces herself as Zeta. Zeta and Cade. Yeah. As Zeta was all close to Cade, all he could think about for a second was how much she looks like his ex. Zeta and Cade talk so she could explain she is from a planet called Zodia. Her people levitate and transfer thoughts with forehead touching. Zeta tells him that her manner of speaking may be awkward because the reading she did of his language wasn't very long or thorough. So this will be our convenient ticket to remembering that she's an alien. Because all alien girls talk like Starfire from Teen Titans. Zeta touches Cade's PS4, which is a big no-no, and he immediately wonders if he made a mistake letting her in. We get a cute little scene where she's afraid of Cade's cat because apparently the tiny void is threatening, and honestly, I do get it. My cats threaten me too. Free today, back. When Zeta pets Cosmo the cat, she gets so happy her eyes start glowing. She tells Cade she came to Earth to start a new life and it's nothing like her planet despite the similarities between their two species. She asks to live with Cade, which he immediately rejects because he's got his own shit to deal with. Then he is reminded again that she's cute. Zeta and Cade go back to her ship to figure out what to do with it, and Zeta turns on an invisibility cloaking device. After that, they go over some house rules. Rule number 1, contribute to the household. Cade doesn't want to clean up after her like she's a child, which is reasonable. Rule number 2, trust. This means listen to him basically because he knows better than her. Sounds rude, but fair enough. And rule number 3, he can't Think of rule 3 right now. So Cade takes a moment to look at Zeta and objectify her. He will constantly be reminded by how small and dainty she is, but with huge thighs and tiny, tiny little calves. He gives Zeta his clothes to wear for pajamas and shows her how to work the shower. I feel like we had an opportunity to talk about how Zodians shower on their planet and what the differences are, but she, of course, makes no mention of it. This will be a trend. There will hardly be a time when the differences between the planets are pointed out that aren't just social. Like, everyone wasn't as nice on Zodia. Seeing Zeta in his clothes post-shower, Cade finally thinks of his third rule, the no feelings rule. A common trope, and it's used to add a little bit of conflict in a story that otherwise lacks it. It's a lazy plot device because in most situations, the characters developing feelings for each other has absolutely no bearing on the story. It doesn't change literally anything, and there's no real stakes to them getting in a relationship. It's also funny when it's suggested by one character in this scenario, which is Cade, because why do you assume she'll even develop feelings for your ass? How do you even know she likes men? It's such an unnatural thing to bring up, and I feel like this rule only really has a place in like contract marriage stories, and even then it's flimsy at best. Zeta accepts his rules and they go to sleep. Cade thinks she's too careless to sleep defensively in a man's home. The two of them agree Zeta will only stay with Cade until he finishes teaching her how to become an Earthling, and after that they will go their separate ways. Cade prepares Zeta breakfast and tells her to address him by name instead of calling him Earthling. They have breakfast, but I feel like there was another missed opportunity to showcase Zeta's cultural customs and eating habits. How and what do Zodians eat? Do they have any rituals related to food? Every time there's an opportunity for Zeta to give us more info about her customs, she just doesn't, and instead just remarks how different Earth is, but we don't understand how or why. This doesn't feel as if it's done to retain mystery about Zeta, but rather because the authors simply didn't think of these details. Cade goes to work and puts in slightly more effort today. Meanwhile, Zeta explores his house, which of course involves stumbling upon his underwear and porn magazines. Porn magazines in 2024 are crazy. She also discovers a pink box in his closet, which we can assume at this point probably has memories of the ex Cade has referenced multiple times. She doesn't look into the box, and at work, Cade makes the crazy decision to buy some sleepwear for Zeta, which is actually just lingerie. It's not revealing, but this is Spencer's, and this is clearly meant to be angel lingerie, like sexy. I'm going insane because who buys sleepwear like this for someone they just met? And please, I'm begging you, file this away for later. When Cade comes home, Zeta immediately confronts him and admits that she accidentally made a mess trying to feed Cosmo the cat because she knows he wants her to clean up after herself. She is in the process of doing so. The mess she made was dropping his PlayStation, and her method of cleaning it was to submerge it in water and wash it. Here's another point where I think we're just having her do things just to do them, because you're really gonna tell me this alien girl from a technologically advanced planet doesn't know what an electronic is and doesn't know that you can't wash them. Okay. Even if her electronics are different, you're really gonna sit here and tell me that she doesn't see it's something you do not submerge in water? You're gonna tell me that? Cade has a mental breakdown at this because his PlayStation is destroyed. He starts talking about how hard his life is. There's people that are dying, Cade. Like, okay, yeah, the PlayStation thing sucks. I get being upset at it, but the fact that one of his major problems is his manager asking him to smile more is a little funny to me. I understand being an introvert. I'm an introvert. It's exhausting dealing with people, but being asked to not be outright rude to customers is hardly a legitimate problem. Zeta attempts to comfort him, and for some reason, he snaps at her about trusting him too easily, and we get the obligatory, "I'm a man, you know," which is just super unnecessary, and it really didn't even fit in this context. Zeta calls him out on it, you know, go girl, give it to him, and they start to get into an argument. Cade yells at her for putting an electronic in water as a supposedly advanced being, and she retorts that she didn't even realize it was electronic. And she has no idea what it is or what it's for, and she's doing her best. I agree with her there, even though I do find it hard to believe that she made a mistake like that. It is true that he didn't teach her anything. He told her to clean up, but he never took time to show an alien from another planet what cleaning up on Earth actually means. For all you know, she thinks that means to just laser everything away. Anyway, he realizes she's afraid, but his apology is cut short as she floats away before he can finish. Cade decides the only way to fix things is to order pizza, as he noted that Zeta hasn't eaten since that morning. He does indeed apologize and they make up. He gives her the unnecessarily sexy nightgown, along with some other things that she might need like bras, underwear, etc. Zeta puts on the nightgown and we are reminded again how thick she is. But tiny, but thick. The chapter ends with Cade's social battery recharging through the power of her thick thighs. I want to make fun of him, but that is how I feel when I see a picture of Megan Thee Stallion. Chapter 9 starts with Cade teaching Zeta everyday things like drying her hair, brushing her teeth. It's unclear why she doesn't know how to do these basics or what her alternative customs are. Even if she intends to be secretive, there's no way she doesn't accidentally act out Zodian customs. Every night, Cade apparently teaches Zeta how to cook a new dish. As they're making spaghetti, we get a cutesy moment of Cade tying her hair up in a bun and then panning to her wearing a diaper and a sweatshirt with impossible thigh-to-leg ratio. Zeta enjoys the food, but laments that on her planet they couldn't choose what to wear or eat. Instead of delving into this more, she decides to make Cade a dish from Zodia. Cade attempts to teach her more stuff. He's clearly avoiding the forehead telepathy, and ultimately he decides that watching TV to learn is a better idea. He remarks how similar again she is to his ex, but Zeta's much kinder. Still, Cade reinforces the thought that nothing can happen between them right before falling asleep on her thighs. The story seems to be moving forward, right? But surely it won't take 150 more chapters for their relationship to develop, right? Right? In the next chapter, Cade talks to his boss, who asks about the nightgown Cade bought. Cade finds the question invasive and questions why it matters. His boss blushes and says he's embarrassed and then gets distracted by a phone call about a new store model. When Cade gets home, he finds something horrible. Zeta has become a weeb. No, but seriously, she found some teacher ex-student manga that Cade had for some reason. Like, Cade, is there something you want to tell the class? He just has physical copies of teacher ex-student manga, just like that, huh? She asks how people make the pictures in it, and it becomes clear that she's enamored with art. Cade helps her get started with some art supplies, and I enjoy this aspect of Zeta's personality. Her hobbies are nice to see, but at the same time, watching Cade have to teach her every little thing and being constantly reminded how small she is gives me the ick. They have more moments, yada yada. A bit later, Cade goes grocery shopping at 2 a.m, so Zeta convinces him that she can go along since there's so few people. At Walmart, Zay ends up floating to reach a toy and Cade catches her to pull her down. They end up buying a Nintendo Switch and head home to play games. At work, Cade's boss comes over to talk to him about why he wants to get to know him. He wants to be friends. However, Cade turns him down, I suppose because he feels awkward about it. It's okay to have boundaries like that. At home, Zeta almost goes through Cade's box again, his breakup box. She decides to put it back, but she drops a picture from the box. She hides it before Cade can see, and then they have the most awkward conversation. Like, I wouldn't have gotten this. He tries to subtly ask how mature she is, which apparently means how old. He then says, hopefully jokingly, that he'll kick her out if she's too young. What? But she ends up being 20, 4 years younger than him, so she's safe. It didn't really feel like a joke, and the whole exchange felt unnecessarily off. Like, if she's a minor by Earth standards, you'll kick her out to be caught and experimented on by your own words because you can't objectify her. The chapter ends with Zeta looking at the picture she dropped earlier before putting it back, and it is a picture of Cade and his ex celebrating 4 years together. The next day, we see Zay wants to ask him about his ex, but she's too afraid. She eventually confesses her snooping crime after accidentally painting his ex, and they argue over it. Cade apologizes for getting heated, leading to him to admit that the photo is of him and someone he hoped would work out, but it didn't. Zeta relates this to her situation with Zodia, and Cade promises that things will be different on Earth. Zeta asks Cade how to do something she saw on TV, which ends up being dancing. Eventually, he says he needs a minute and he stops, and she notices it's because he's crying. He confesses he misses his ex a ton and hasn't dealt with those feelings. Zeta reminds him of her. Zeta comforts him by bringing the world's most compliant cat and hugging him as he cries. This was a cute moment, and I do appreciate that Cade hasn't magically gotten over his ex, and it's nice to see the change in him expressing himself from chapter 1 to now. It's also nice to see the fallout of a male character trying to keep their emotions inside and how it eventually boils over. But this progress feels good for chapter 20. Remember that. The next day, however, Cade continues to be rude to customers. The boss, Stace, confronts him about why he's going back in his shell. Cade is on his phone and he briskly says he's just being himself, to which Stace replies by firing him. Cade surprised Pikachu at this, which is crazy because he is an awful employee. When Cade gets home early, Zeta and him decide to go out and get boba to comfort him. Zeta reveals that she has an insecurity over her pointed ears after noticing some other women walk in. Cade shows her that some people get elf ear surgery to look like her. I love when conventionally attractive characters have an extremely minor, not actually a flaw that they're super self-conscious about, even though it's actually a quirky feature that makes them even more endearing in universe. It's so unique. All the while, a strange man watches them in the background. He eventually approaches and outright asks, is she an alien? The stranger ends up being a high school senior, who assumed she was an alien because of her ears? This makes Zeta more self-conscious, and Cade gets extremely offended and forces the teenager to apologize. He immediately seems to regret this pseudo-violence, and says sorry. But honestly, I find it ironic because Cade is not known for taking how others feel into account when he speaks. This connection is lost on the narrative. We will never see the narrative address Cade's hypocrisy in regards to how he treats others. To make it up to them, the kid takes them to an arcade and loads up a card for them. Cade surprisingly talks a lot with the kid, which is unusual for him, but Zeta looks uncomfortable in the crowded arcade and asks to borrow Cade's hoodie to cover herself. Sensing her discomfort, Cade whisks Zeta away, saying the kid also freaks him out despite his earlier talkativeness. They decide to use the picture booth where Cade helps Zeta take off the hoodie to boost her confidence, but then they are caught in a compromising position by the kid who bursts into the booth. The trio decide to get food after teasing by the kid, Ethan. They ask him about his alien fixation, and he tells them backstory about how his brother and him were obsessed with aliens together. As they got older, his brother stopped believing, but they were still really close. However, 2 years ago, his brother got into a car crash and died. When the trio is about to go their separate ways, Ethan stops them and confesses he's seen them on security camera footage at Walmart. He works there, and he saw Zeta float. He tells them he deleted the footage already, but he just wants the truth. So Zay and Cade tell Ethan everything. Zay seems very excited to share information and show off, and even shows Ethan her sketches. He asks Cade up front what sex is like because he thinks they're a couple. Zay says there's no romance between them, but then the kid asks some invasive questions about why Zay left her home planet, and Cade, who doesn't even know himself, tells the kid it's time for him to leave. The kid says he had a great time meeting Zeta, was a dream come true, and he wishes they'd have half-alien babies. And I get that he's only 18, but he is weirdly obsessed with Cade and Zeta's sex life. Zeta tries to ask Cade to explain how mating works on Earth, but he's too embarrassed to do so. And honestly, I don't get it. Like, you're 24, you are a grown-ass man, you can explain sex. He says she can learn from her future lover, but she nonchalantly says he can be her future lover, problem solved. He denies her and reminds her of Rule 3, which Zeta remarks later to herself that it's stupid. And honestly, yes, it's there for no reason. I think the only reason we even had this scene is to remind us that Rule 3 exists. Later, we see Cade has gotten a text from his ex from the first chapter, Ellie. Ellie ends up making a surprise visit, and Zeta opens the door. Ellie starts out catty to Zeta as she forcibly joins them for breakfast. She clearly wants Cade to feel awkward, so she starts talking about how they met. We get backstory of how Cade and Ellie met. Of course, they were childhood BFFs, which is crazy because in chapter 1, he acted like he don't know this bitch from nowhere. He really acted like he didn't give two shits about her, but she's had a crush on him their whole childhood that he didn't reciprocate. And so him saying in the first chapter, "You're the third girl I dated this month," is extra disrespectful. He ends up confiding in her about a really pretty girl at school, Delilah, that he admires, and we quickly realize this is his ex that he can't get over. Very reluctantly, my girl Ellie sets up the introduction, and Cade became obsessed with Delilah ever since then. Then, in 10th grade, Cade and Delilah start dating, and he essentially cuts off Ellie for 5 years. Like, he never texted her, he never called, none of that. After breaking up with Delilah, Cade crawls back to Ellie. For advice, she says he needs to stop dating for a while, but of course he starts dating new girls every other second. He eventually says he's done dating, and she confronts him about ditching her for years until he and Delilah split, and somehow this leads to Ellie kissing him. Cade assumes her kiss was a dumb joke. She's like, "No, you idiot. I've had a crush on you all this time." She knows she's not his type, but she still wants to try to make him happy anyways. He reminds her of her own advice to stop dating, but she admits she feels like this is her only chance. Truly, all this backstory makes him look so fucking bad because she really wasn't just some random bitch. This was his best friend from grade school, whom he's been constantly trauma dumping on, and he knew she was in love with him, yet he treated their relationship like it was garbage, like it was nothing. Yes, he's depressed, but he gets mad when other people don't phrase things right. He gets upset when other people don't show consideration for him, and yet he couldn't spare even a few seconds of empathy for his childhood best friend who was in love with him. Zay ends up separating Ellie and Cade by taking Ellie into their room and comforting her. Ellie apologizes for how she acted towards Zay earlier, saying she's really sweet and she deserves better than Cade. So true. Ellie notices the photos on Zeta's bed that Cade and her took at the arcade, and she's like, "How did you get him to smile like this?" And all those photos are because he's happy when he's with Zeta. And it's like, honestly, yes, she's very kind, but it's giving only pussy can heal you. Like a thick booty hoe can heal you. Because his best friend couldn't get a smile out of him all those years, but a random thick booty hoe can. When I was writing this, my husband was telling me during my note-taking that a thick alien friend is something to smile about, but she looks just like a human. So she's finishing up the flashback. Cade and Ellie exchange apologies, with Ellie admitting to using Cade's desperation in hopes to get him to fall in love with her, and Cade admitting to using her to get over Delilah. Ellie starts to leave after telling them that she's moving 12 hours away, but Cade stops her. He yells that he's always thought she was cute and fun, but didn't want to risk their friendship. He didn't want her to think he didn't notice how great she was. This confession was obviously really embarrassing for Cade, and it's a big deal for his character, but it was nice, and it was a cute conclusion to their arc. In the next chapter, we see that Cade is working at Walmart, a job he hates, but he got it thanks to Ethan. He later confides in Zeta that he's unsure if he wants to trust Ethan, and Zeta decides she trusts him. Cade accidentally calls her pretty during this interaction. Zeta fixates on this and remembers her past on Zodia, where we can see she probably had no friends. At work, Cade meets a beautiful woman with vitiligo and accidentally stares at her for too long, which causes her to call him a pervert. He gets upset by this, so much so that when he and Zeta try to do a longer forehead data transfer, he's too self-conscious to continue. He doesn't want Zeta to see how much he's been thinking about her in a not-so-friendly way. Cade texts Ethan for help tutoring Zeta, and they meet at a restaurant. Cade shuts down any small talk, and after several hours of tutoring, Zeta and Cade move to leave without a fucking word. No thank you, no nothing. Ethan calls them out on this and makes them join him at a gaming store. All right, sidebar. Why? I genuinely don't even understand why Cade needed Ethan to tutor Zeta. Why do you need this high school senior to tutor her? Why can't you? At the gaming store, Zeta bumps into Cade's boss, Stace, who has fallen in love with her at first sight. He's about to ask for her number when Cade interrupts. He's about to claim that Zeta is his girlfriend, but she says they're friends first. The jealousy act is so annoying because it's like, bro, you're the one with the strict boundaries, okay? Who are you to stop her from getting hit on? I mean, actually though, I can't lie, I do enjoy this trope sometimes. It's just maybe Cade's not hot enough to pull it off. Anyway, Cade makes Stace say what he wants, so he ends up asking Zeta to be a model for Spencer's. Cade tries to refuse this on behalf of Zeta, but Stace is like, excuse me, I wasn't asking you, and Zeta takes his business card, though she's unsure. Back at Cade's job, he runs into Stace again. Stace offers Cade his old job if he agrees to hang out with him, with a raise. Cade calls this out as being a ploy to get closer to Zeta, and Stace points out that he actually asked Cade to hang out before. Cade takes the deal and doesn't tell Zeta, just that she should model if she wants. We never acknowledge that he's bargained Zeta's time, basically, for his old job back. Cade is back at his old job, super happy, before he notices the employee who replaced him is the hot girl with vitiligo. She starts to bully him, and he spends the rest of the day avoiding her. When he's back home, he vents to Zeta about his day while she comforts him. I'm not gonna lie. Cade's problems are non-issues. They are so extremely small, and I'm torn because this is sort of a realistic depiction of someone with depression who feels like their life is falling apart at the smallest infraction. But at the same time, we're almost 40 chapters in, and he's gotten no better. He still acts like the world is ending because his boss wants to be his friend. Ethan shows up wondering why the fuck Cade wasn't at work, and they tell him everything. They don't touch on this, but it is kind of insane to quit a job that an acquaintance just got you after a few days and not even tell them that you're going to do that. And narratively, this is ignored like most of the out-of-pocket things that Cade does. Ethan tells Cade to act stone cold to the girl at work to show she can't bother him, and it seems like now Cade might be accepting Ethan as a friend. The age difference between Cade and Ethan is a bit odd for friendship, and I'm not sure why he wasn't made to be in college instead. At work, the new girl continues teasing Cade at first, but eventually confesses she was just trying to be his friend and start a conversation. He doesn't really buy this, and she ends up making a few more snarky remarks, which I can see why that annoys him because they don't know each other from nowhere, and she's insulting him playfully like they're close. Cade goes to take lunch and is joined by Stace, the boss. The two of them bicker a bunch, but still manage to ultimately have a nice lunch together. Stace reveals why he wanted to be Cade's friend. He has a lot of acquaintances, but no real friends, and he feels that Cade's friendship would be a worthy challenge to earn. Cade thinks this is stupid, and they bicker on their way out. Even the cashier thinks they're a couple. Ethan texts Cade to ask how his day went, and Cade starts to go into autopilot complain mode, but deletes it and says he's having a good day after all. Character development, you love to see it. Later on, Zeta confesses that she's been feeling left out. She's naturally extroverted, but has no one to talk to except Cade and no phone to contact friends. Cade can't afford to buy her a new phone yet, but he surprises Zeta by arranging a movie outing with Stace and Ethan. Despite a few bumps, Cade's dumbass jealousy and Zeta's sadness that everyone but her has a phone, they have a pretty good time. Zeta's super thankful to Cade for arranging it. He says he never thought about how she must feel cooped up in the house all day, promising to do this again if she ever wants. And I am glad that they're actually tackling that she's home alone constantly, because for some reason, this exact scenario is very common in Alien Girl comics, and this topic isn't usually brought up. Like, they're just home alone all the time, and they're okay with that. Cade catches a cold because the two Nimrods ran in the rain at the end of their hangout, but Zeta has no idea how to help. She accesses his memories to find out what to do, which results in her getting glimpses of his past relationship with Delilah, his ex. She asks my guy if he can tell her more about his relationship with Delilah, even though bro is quite literally suffering from a fever. Not a good time. He says he'll only tell if she tells more about herself, and she's not ready to do that, so the conversation ends there. Ethan visits for study time, and Zeta tells him that Cade is sick. Ethan notices she seems off, so he tries to ask what's wrong, and Zeta says that she has a secret, and she's afraid that if they found out, it would change how they see her. Ethan reassures her that he'll be her friend no matter what. We then get a title drop where Ethan is like, you know, for an alien, you sure are down to earth. Ethan leaves, but Stace comes over immediately after. He says he was worried because Cade didn't call out of work that day, but he no-showed. Zeta informs him Cade is sick, so he tries to talk about the modeling offer with her. Cade somehow senses Stace's presence and jealously hugs Zeta and basically tells Stace to get lost, which is so rude because he didn't know Zeta lived there, which means he came to legitimately check on him. Most managers don't do that. And Cade is definitely lucky to not get reprimanded for a no-call, no-show. I got fired once for calling out of a job where it was my first time calling out after months of being there. Anyway, Stace gave Zeta a magazine before leaving, so she showed it to Cade. Cade's co-worker with vitiligo is in the magazine as a model, but Cade is nervous about her still being fixated on the modeling thing. She wants to feel independent, but Cade argues that she can't even read. He's like, damn bitch, you too dumb. Zeta says she can read if he just lets her use telepathy and assures him if he's worried about weird thoughts, it's okay, cause she has them too. Okay girl, I see you. They agree to do a memory exchange where he'll show his favorite memory of Delilah and she'll show a memory of Zodia. He shows when Delilah confessed to him after school, but he ends up breaking down in real life sobbing. Zeta comforts him and they get closer through this, but decide to continue the memory sharing later. Through this, Zeta finally learns to read and write later on, and since they forgot to tell Ethan, he comes over for a study session anyway. This is a recurring trend of Cade forgetting to tell people things, and it's narratively ignored as a flaw, despite the fact that he would lose his shit if anyone did it to him. The three of them brainstorm on Zeta's next steps, which they think should be some sort of career. Ethan ends up commissioning Zeta to make him a drawing and gives her $100 in return. The next day, Cade and Zeta go to the mall to use that money to buy a phone. Zeta and Cade argue while they're there because he doesn't want to take her to see his store, and she wants to go. He doesn't want her to see Stace since he's a creep. Zeta calls him out on his shit and they make up, buy a phone, and they go to Spencer's. Cade surprisingly thanks Stace for checking up on him when he was sick. Zeta, meanwhile, approaches Susie, the coworker with vitiligo, to get modeling advice. They exchange numbers because Susie can pierce ears. Susie comes over to the house, and Zeta accidentally reveals that she's an alien. Oops! She gets too excited when Susie asks to be friends, so her eyes start glowing. Cade tries to stop her, too late, and Susie initially is like, oh hell no, I'm out of here. Cade stops her to say Zeta is a cool person if you just get to know her, so Susie returns and listens to Zeta's story. She even offers to let Zeta live with her instead, but Zeta turns it down. Cade gets along pretty well with Susie at work, but Stace asks to talk to him about Zeta. He tells Cade he's interested in her because she's like no one else he's ever seen, and she's sexy, which pisses Cade off. He stomps home to find Susie and Ethan already there, getting along with Zeta and having a gathering. He's mad that Stace said Zeta is sexy, like Cade don't spend every third panel objectifying her. He's literally being so over the top, while Zeta and her friends are just trying to have fun. Zeta and Cade end up having to sleep in the same bed, oh no, while the others sleep over on the couch. They use mind sharing for Cade to be able to express his feelings, that he's essentially upset with himself for being jealous and thinking of her in a sexual way. But she reminds him that she has those thoughts too. He wants to know more about her because he doesn't really know anything. And she shares a small snippet of information about her life on Zodia, seemingly as a prisoner of sorts. She was told if she left Zodia, it would fall, and this is the horrible thing she mentioned to Ethan that she did. Cade reassures her, and they fall asleep, where he has a nightmare involving Zeta and Delilah. Later on, Zeta tries to make Cade and her get rid of their memory boxes, which for Zeta would be the box with her old clothes that she arrived in chapter 1, and for Cade would be his memory box with Delilah. And she says it would be good for moving on, and she prepares an empty trash can so they can practice throwing their memory boxes away. She easily threw her box away, but Cade is not ready to do this, and he says that they shouldn't rush anything, and they need to focus on figuring out what she's gonna do with her future. He's obviously just saying this to pivot the conversation away from throwing away his memory box because he's not ready. Susie, the coworker, invites Cade and Zeta to go to a fashion show with her so Zeta can see what modeling is like. Susie put makeup on Zeta and she's supposed to look really hot. So Cade gets kind of jealous and decides to tag along even though he initially didn't want to go. At the fashion show, Zeta and Susie are having a good time. Cade is clearly anxious. Delilah ends up showing up backstage, so Zeta panics and tries to rush Cade out. He ends up seeing Delilah anyway, who says hi to him, but Cade runs away. A month and a half passes since that day, and Cade has been pretty much ignoring everyone and acting like a shit again at work, not showering, often not really eating, being rude, and depressed. All things considered, Stace is a more understanding boss than most people have to put up with Cade being unkempt, dirty, and rude for another month and a half. Zeta is distressed and doesn't know how to help him feel better, especially when he ignores all of her advances to talk. Zeta tries to get advice from Ethan and Susie on how to help Cade, and she mentions that he has at least groomed himself in the last day and shaved his beard, cut his hair, blah blah blah. Susie informs her that Delilah showed up at the store, so it actually seems like Cade has taken 2 steps backwards because he only showered and groomed himself to impress Delilah. Cade also got in trouble at work and was told by Stace that he needs to get his act together or he's gonna have to be fired. This arc is so frustrating because even if it's a somewhat realistic portrayal of depression, we're supposed to be rooting for the main couple. This is a romance. But I'm not. Zeta deserves someone who loves her and isn't trying to impress his ex. That could be Susie. I'm just saying. Susie did bring up that Zeta could give Cade time and space and offered again for Zeta to go live with Susie. Cade and Zeta have a night watching movies together, and Cade randomly hugs her the same way he hugged Delilah in the picture that he's always looking at. So she pushes him away and eventually calls Ellie. Queen Ellie answers the phone as wonderful as ever. Zeta tells Ellie that Cade has been acting differently ever since he saw Delilah, and Ellie sympathizes, but basically says what any female friend would say in this situation, that she thinks Cade and Zeta should break up. Zeta realizes this means the same thing as what Susie was saying. They need space away from each other. Cade's mom randomly visits, and honestly, I'm not sure what this added to the narrative, but yeah. He tells his mom that he and Zeta are in a relationship, so he's over Delilah. Zeta asked him if he lies to her often, like he just lied to his mom. She thinks that they need space, so he can learn to be himself again, and he wants to say that Zeta's not the problem, but instead he just agrees with her. Cade is starting to compare Zeta to Ellie in his mind because of Ellie leaving him, which apparently affected him more than we saw, which doesn't really make any sense because we saw pretty much everything since the day he and Ellie broke up. He really didn't give a fuck about that girl like at all until she was reintroduced, but I digress. Zeta ends up moving out to live with Susie. Susie tells Zeta that she's a runaway because her family didn't accept her for liking other women. She expected a negative reaction from Zeta, but thankfully Zodia doesn't have homophobia. Zeta offers to share memories with her, so this way Susie can tell her about her past. And I mean, I think it's really obvious at this point that Susie has a bit of a crush on Zeta, and honestly, I wouldn't be mad if the story went in that direction, because Cade is a fucking loser. And I'm so angry at him lately, because he's the male lead, and if Zeta were my friend, I would tell her to get over his dumb ass and move out. Leave him and let him go to therapy and learn to get over his ex, and stop lashing out at everyone else and acting like he's the only person with problems. Susie escaped her evil, homophobic family with her twin sister's help, although they haven't talked since. Zeta and Susie clearly get closer through this interaction and understand each other even more because Zeta felt very similar when she was running away from her home. Ethan calls and invites them to go to an anime convention in a month. So Susie invites Cade too, who very quickly agrees to go, and she starts to feel a little guilty at taking Zeta away from him because of how lonely he is, and she reminds him that it's not permanent. Stace overhears this conversation and assumes it means Cade and Zeta broke up. Stace approaches Susie later to ask if she and Zeta are close and wants to know what Zeta thinks about his modeling offer. Susie thinks it's a good idea, and the two decide to invite Zeta over to the store one day to give her more of an idea of what she'd be doing as a model. During a talk about money, Zeta remarks that she wants to become independent, and that's when Susie brings up the modeling job. The comments were really not on Stace or Susie's side with this, and people seem to think that Susie was pressuring Zeta, and in a lot of ways, and that Stace was a weasel for planning this purposely on a day when Cade wouldn't be around. I don't really agree with that assessment because Cade has been a jealous asshole about the modeling thing. His presence would be a hindrance. I think Susie's just acting like a very normal friend and how they would act in this situation. Anyway, Zeta accompanies Susie the next day to her shift at work, and Delilah is there also. Stace gives Zeta the rundown on what she is expected to be doing as a model, and also tells her that she will need to bring in some form of ID, which clearly nobody has thought of until this point. Zeta uses technology from her ship to create a fake ID and goes to Spencer's and gets approved for the job. She gets a photo shoot set up and she's very excited and nervous. That night, she asks Susie if she can drive her to see Cade because she wants to share the good news with him. But Susie says that she's tired because she's going to sleep and it's probably not a good idea anyway. And again, the comments are not on Susie's side, which is very strange to me because it's actually absolutely unreasonable to expect Susie to drive Zeta to go see Cade on a whim before bed on a work day. And it's extremely normal best friend behavior for Susie to encourage Zeta to be her own person more outside of Cade. Honestly, I've been enjoying these last few chapters of Zeta living her life and exploring things on her own a lot more without Cade's moping. It's been nice to not have him there all the time. Zeta sneaks away to go see Cade and they have a happy reunion. Zeta even asks if she can move back in. Cade wants her to, but says it's not a good idea because he thinks that the separation is good for both of them, which is character growth, I will give him that. Cade takes Zeta back to Susie, who is extremely worried to find Zeta missing and says that she'll drive Zeta anytime to go see Cade because she shouldn't be flying. Like in this age, how in the hell has she not been recorded flying? Her bright neon slime Nickelodeon green ass hair. Ethan, Zeta, Cade, and Susie all hang out where Cade even wishes Zeta good luck on her first day of work. The next day, Susie takes Zeta in for the photo shoot. Zeta becomes friends with the makeup artist and learns that Stace is her photographer. Stace definitely looks creepy here, okay, and I'm a Stace apologist, because he never told her he was the photographer, and he specifically requested lingerie for her first outfit, though he told her she could turn any outfit down. So she turns down the lingerie and wears a more conservative dress. The photo shoot goes really well, and the makeup artist Sherry is a very strange character who declares herself Zeta's new best friend. Sherry and Susie and Zeta get lunch together, where Susie is clearly a little jealous of Sherry, but then the trio run into Ethan and Cade hanging out together. It's surprising that Cade is hanging out with someone other than Zeta all by himself. I just ate a bunch of food, and it's been like 3 hours, so... Sherry runs towards Cade, crying and hugs him, and we learn over coffee later that they were extremely close until they graduated. Sherry doesn't know why they fell out, and it's clear that Cade doesn't want to say so, but she's just happy to see him again. And Zeta seems happy to learn that there was nothing between them. Sherry tells Cade about the lingerie that Stace picked for Zeta. The next day at work, Cade very angrily confronts Stace. The way Cade kind of resorts to violence is so not cute. Stace tells Cade he doesn't understand what the big deal is. Spencer's picks the outfits as a whole and he just gives options. Now, again, I think the lingerie thing is creepy and so do the comments, but let's backtrack a bit. I'm begging you, file this away for later. And at work, Cade makes the crazy decision to buy some sleepwear for Zeta, which is actually just lingerie. Like, are we forgetting that? Why is he so mad? That's your twin. Stace and Cade both like Zeta, and Stace tried to be Cade's friend, but now it seems like they're just rivals. He also informs Cade that he knows Zeta's ID is fake, which Cade nervously tells to Susie, and quickly says that they are not going to tell Zeta because they don't want to make her nervous. Clearly, a step backwards in my opinion, because for chapters now Zeta has been telling us she wants to be her own person. Hiding something as big as her boss, knowing her ID is fake, and that she's being paid under the table is not treating her like an independent human being. Alien. We time skip to the convention where Zeta is dressed like Zelda. Hehe. Now, before Susie said she was going to do a cosplay with Zeta, and yet my girl shows up looking bland as hell. So I don't know what happened there. Maybe the author forgot. Ethan and Susie decide to split from Zeta and Cade to give them space. Zeta is extremely popular at the convention. People want to get pictures with her. Cade's jealous. Cade meets another old friend, Dustin, who is a famous YouTuber. He lost touch with him, and we can clearly see that this is a pattern that probably has something to do with Delilah. It is very common for abusers to isolate their victims. Cade introduces Dustin to the rest of the group, and I don't know how to describe it. Dustin's entire existence felt like a random patron from the author's Patreon asking to be featured. He's actually the author's editor, I recently found out, and it still fits with how out of place his inclusion feels. Everyone gets along very well together, but Dustin asks if Cade and Zeta are dating at some point, and Cade denies it, which confuses Zeta because she remembers that he told his mom they were dating. She seems to not like knowing whether she is supposed to lie or not. Dustin asks to privately talk with Cade to see if he was still with Delilah. He's glad to hear that Cade isn't because he's only heard negative things about her in the influencer sphere. Cade gets pissed, jumping to Delilah's defense by saying she was actually very sweet and it's all a load of baloney. Zeta purposefully snoops during this conversation. Zeta asks Susie to go home with Cade, and Susie replies, "Of course, you don't have to ask me," which again shows, I think, that Susie is not trying to control or separate Zeta from Cade. Zeta ends up asking Cade if Delilah was nice, to which he says yes. She challenges him to prove it with his memories. He points out that he barely knows anything about her past, and she shares a very small snippet of Zodia, which was just her as a child saying she wants to learn to fly. It is a nothing memory. We are 120 chapters, and we still don't know anything about Zodia. And at this point, it honestly feels like the author doesn't know anything about Zodia either. Zeta being an alien is just used as a backdrop to get her and Cade living together, but not something with any real depth. Like, almost everything about this story would be exactly the same if she were a foreign exchange student who shared a dorm with him. Anyway, Cade decides to share memories with her of Delilah, and all the memories Cade shares are of Delilah being at best not rude, but eventually the memories get more abusive and our suspicions are confirmed that she was isolating him from everyone else. This eventually turns into her verbally abusing him, and it's clear that he used to be a lot more social before they dated. Zeta is shocked by these memories, but Cade tries to reassure her that he's probably not remembering correctly. I do think that this is a good depiction of abuse and a survivor's reaction. I definitely don't blame Cade for being upset or having trauma over Delilah, but the pace of the story as a whole feels very poorly done. Zeta leaves and goes back to Susie's house very upset. She tells her what happened with Cade and that she experiences the memories the way the other person did and feels what they felt. Delilah was terrifying, but she still sparkled to Cade. They're both very worried about him, but there's not much they can do if he's still in denial. Zeta asks if she'll ever have to work with Delilah, and Susie reassures her that that's not common at all. However, the next scene is Stace announcing a collaboration between Zeta and Delilah. They finally get formally introduced to each other. Zeta is extremely nervous to be introduced to Delilah, who starts asking Zeta questions under the guise of wanting to get to know her. Zeta extremely awkwardly avoids answering any questions, and Sherry, the makeup artist, tries her best to protect Zeta by letting Delilah know that she seems uncomfortable. At first, Zeta does very poorly with the photo shoot, but after Stace tells her to think of something that makes her mad, she thinks of Delilah and is suddenly America's next top model. Does being mad make you a good model? Is it that easy? I don't think so, but I'm a true hater, so if that's the case, I am going to switch careers. Afterwards, Delilah tries to go out for lunch with Sherry and Zeta, but Zeta makes a dash by excusing that she already has plans with Stace. Stace is thrilled to be asked out by Zeta. They have a nice lunch where Zeta says that she hopes he and Cade can get along, but she will be his friend. At work, Cade finds out from Susie that Stace and Zeta had lunch together. Cade is pissed, so while hanging out with Zeta later, he decides to ask her why she was with Stace. She avoids mentioning Delilah by saying he seems like a fine friend to have, and Cade tells her not to trust him, but he can't stop her from being friends with who she wants. Don't trust him because he called her sexy? Pot and kettle, everyone. Susie and Cade are hanging out at work the next day, and let me just say, I do love their friendship. It's very cute. When Susie's twin walks in, at first, Susie wants to avoid her, but then decides to face up while Cade reassures her that he's there if she needs it. Susie confronts her sister and they both say how much they miss each other. Cade clearly seemed a little inspired by this because when Delilah walks in shortly after and asks to have lunch with him, he says it's not a good idea and then excuses himself. Another point of character growth for Cade, I will say, a few chapters ago, he would have run away without a word instead. Later on, Zeta, Cade, Susie, and Susie's twin all get dinner together and seem to have a very nice time. I don't understand how they haven't gotten Zeta's story straight, because every fucking time someone asks a very simple question like where she's from, everyone crumbles. How have they not taken any time at all in all these chapters to figure a story out for her? Where she grew up, what her first language was, where she immigrated from, what school she went to. Like, they could literally just say she's from any unknown country and that's it. They don't have to figure out too many details after that, but we're like 130 chapters in and nobody's even figured out what to say Zeta's first language is. After dinner, Zeta and Cade talk where he reveals he found out about her collab with Delilah by asking how it's going, and she says it's extremely awkward working with her. Cade surprisingly wishes her luck and tells her to be strong for what she wants to do. He doesn't seem to crumble at all at the mention of Delilah. Next time we see Zeta and Delilah working together, Delilah is clearly trying to love bomb Zeta. She's doting all over her, complimenting her, and following her around. Zeta has no idea how to react to this and later on complains to Susie. Cade arranges a meeting with Dustin and asks if he can just vent to him. He doesn't really give any information to Dustin about his relationship with Delilah, but Dustin still gathers that the relationship was toxic. Cade says he wants to get back together with Delilah because he misses her, and he regrets breaking up with her. Dustin asks Cade if he would even be happy if he got back together with Delilah, and Cade says he would be a little happy, but he would really miss Zeta because they would not get to hang out at all anymore, and he can't imagine that. Cade has a realization and ends the hangout by running off. He called this man out of his busy day, and Dustin thought they were going to hang out and then just left him alone like that. Cade is an awful friend. He takes his memory box of photos of Delilah and goes into the forest and starts to light it on fire, but of course healing from abuse is not a linear process, and he ends up putting the fire out, getting extremely frustrated with himself for his mixed emotions. We flash forward to Delilah and Zeta's last photo shoot together. After it wraps up, there are a ton of agencies just outside of the building trying to recruit Zeta, which is odd. I don't think that's how that works at all, but Stace sends them all away as it's clearly overwhelming. An aside, right? Stace is paying Zeta under the table. How is that working? Because he is just a manager slash photographer for Spencer's, but he's also able to pay a model under the table that they put in their magazines? I don't know. You get what I'm saying? Like, that's a little strange. Anyways, Delilah gets jealous and lashes out at Stace and Zeta and tells Zeta she overheard Cade and Stace talking and that she only got the job because Stace wants to get closer to her. Stace says that he thinks Zeta deserved the job regardless of his feelings basically, and Zeta says thank you while she goes off to chase after Delilah. The two have a talk outside the building. Zeta wants to know what Delilah overheard Cade and Stace talking about before, and Delilah basically says nothing, but realizes Zeta and Cade are not in an official relationship. It almost seems like Delilah is going to have a redemption arc because she apologizes to Zeta for being mean and says that modeling makes her incredibly competitive. From what we know, she has never apologized to Cade, so it seems like very uncharacteristic behavior. They exchange contact information and go their separate ways. Meanwhile, Cade is very much in a slump ever since he attempted to burn the box. Susie and her sister are going on a trip together, so Zeta decides to go stay with Cade while they do that. After they spend the day together, Cade falls asleep on the couch and Zeta's intrusive thoughts start telling her to kiss him. She realizes she can't do that while he's sleeping and also realizes that she's probably in love with him. Zeta does wonder if she's only in love with Cade because he's nice to her, or because they've spent so much time together, or because he's the first person she met on Earth. I feel like this is sort of the author addressing any criticism directly because it does appear that way. Of course, Zeta and Cade do get along really well, and they have cute moments together sometimes, but for the most part, it's hard not to think that she's only in love with him because he's the first person she ever met. It feels like the author is adding this in to acknowledge those criticisms, but yet there is no follow-through that disproves them. Unpopular opinion, probably, but a way that I would appreciate this romance developing is if they spent several years apart and Zeta got to date other people. Anyway, Cade wakes up while Zeta is hovering above him, so she runs away embarrassed. She tries to text Susie for advice, but by accident she sends the text message to Ethan. She tries to delete the message, which of course only deletes the message on her end. She mentions her and Cade are planning to go to the amusement park the next morning and wishes him a good night. Ethan asks Dustin to go with him and help wingman. The next morning, Zeta is very awkward around Cade, having put in extra effort into her makeup and outfit in an attempt to impress him. Cade notices her awkwardness, but thinks that her curiosity is getting the better of her. He doesn't seem to experience the same nervousness, and he definitely doesn't seem to think that Zeta likes him romantically. At the theme park, they quickly realize that it's a couples theme park, which is kind of insane to have a whole theme park just for couples, considering they're usually for children, but anyways, Zeta asks if she and Cade can pretend to be a couple too. They decide to go on the Ferris wheel while Ethan and Dustin's whole arc of being here, following them, seems so pointless and contributes nothing really. It's creepy, if anything. Cade decides to confront her directly, and he says he's noticed tension between them that's only gotten stronger, so he asks her what she thinks about it. At first, she tries to deny that she feels anything, but eventually she blurts out that she broke our favorite arbitrary rule, Rule 3, and starts crying. They then decide to go into the tunnel of love afterwards, which seems like an awkward place to potentially turn someone down, as Cade is clearly wrestling with whether he should go out with Zeta or not. His anxiety is telling him that he's ruined every friendship he's had with a woman by dating them. Honestly, that makes more sense here than this excuse usually does, because Cade really do be ruining his friendships with women. Zeta straight up asks him what he thinks of her. He says he doesn't want to ruin his friendship with her, but he's afraid of ruining it by not being honest with her, so he reveals how much he loves being with her. They go on another ride that says it's only for couples, just like the whole park so far, so I don't know why they needed to stipulate that. It's supposed to be very squished, making you sit on the other person's lap. But like in this panel, there's plenty of room, so dead ass, she could have sat next to him if she wanted, because I'm seeing enough room for 3 people. Anyways, they finally kiss, and then they very awkwardly stay silent the entire ride home. Cade keeps wondering if he fucked up, but Zeta comes into his room at night and thanks him for the best night of her life, so she decides it is a fuck up he does not regret. Zeta's request to Stace to be kinder to her friends ends up causing Cade to be suspicious of him. Cade decides to be nice to Stace back, so this way he can find out his motivations, which is a little silly because Stace is not an evil mastermind. Back at home, Cade and Zeta have the talk. She asks if he still has feelings for Delilah. He wasn't expecting that question and said no. This is surprising because 15 chapters ago, he was saying he wants to get back together with Delilah. As readers, we knew that he wasn't in love with her anymore, but the fact that he came to that explicit conclusion off screen is a little underwhelming. He reiterates that he's over her but feels complicated feelings like Zeta and Zodia. She asks him if they're dating now, and he says that he truly wants to be in a relationship with her, but he is not in a good headspace to do so, and it would not be a good relationship for them. I actually really liked the way he turned her down, and I think it was very reasonable. He says that he needs to get healthier, and he has a lot of progress to make, and he can't make it while he's in a relationship or just because of one. Honestly, good for him. So he says that she doesn't have to wait, but if she does, he will be extremely happy. Of course, she says she will wait for him. Zeta and Cade go out to get sushi together. They meet Stace while they're there, who joins them for dinner against Cade's will. Stace tries to get them to get drinks and himself drinks, but Cade refuses. Stace is like, do you really let him dictate you like this? But Cade says again that he and Zeta are good. I can understand from Stace's point of view, Cade looks like an overly controlling situationship. Not even her boyfriend. He doesn't know that Zeta is an alien, so he's thinking, why is this bitch speaking for her all the time? Stace ends up getting overly drunk though, and passes out in the restaurant, so Cade and Zeta are forced to take him home. Cade has the bright idea that this is the perfect time to learn Stace's extremely complex, complicated, devious motivations, and asks Zeta to read his mind. Without consent. This is so fucked up, and it's such an extreme violation. He could be thinking tons of secretive things, even things other people told him. This is mind assault. Cade would be suicidal if someone did this to him. She gets interrupted by Stace waking up and seeing her floating. He passes back out and wakes up again spewing gibberish. He cries about still being a virgin, never having been kissed, and having no friends. He thought Cade and Zeta could be his friends, but they both seem like they don't want him in their lives. He cries, then falls back asleep. Eventually, Cade drops him off and Stace thanks him but says this changes nothing and they are still rivals. Zeta oversleeps the next day and misses work because she seems like she might be getting a fever. She also has nightmares of her time on Zodia. We see her as a scared child being led around by some other green-haired bitches. When Cade gets home later, he feels like she might be sick. Her temperature is over 200 degrees, but they realize they need a baseline, so they do eyesight, strength, and reflex tests before Zeta stops him. This also seems like something they should have done a long time ago. We see that Cade saw Zeta glowing bright green last night in her sleep, so he knows that she's hiding something. Zeta later sets up a meeting with Delilah in front of Cade, who admits it's weird, but he can't stop her from being friends. This is her soon-to-be boyfriend's abusive ex-girlfriend. So bitch, what the fuck are you doing? Why would you want to hang out with her? Not to be if the roles were reversed, but truly, I think the comments would be tearing Zeta apart if they were. Delilah and Zeta have a lot of fun hanging out together, and Delilah is extremely nice to her. Zeta wonders why Delilah is so different from Cade's memories. I'm not sure of the author's play here. Delilah feels like a very inconsistent character, as if the author isn't sure if they want to redeem her or not. I understand that abusers are multifaceted and can be kind to others, but that just doesn't feel like what's happening narratively. Delilah doesn't feel complex. She feels like whatever the plot needs her to be at that specific time. Later, Zeta tries to pay for their food, but realizes she doesn't know how to count money. How the fuck have they not taught her how to count money? The bitch has a job. She has a shit ton of bills in her wallet, but she doesn't know how to count money? How did that happen? How did she get those bills in her fucking wallet and not know how to count money? This seems like another plot hole also, because Zeta learned the language and mannerisms from Cade by doing longer telepathy, and you're telling me she learned that without learning how to count? Regardless, Sherry, the makeup artist, ends up coming to save the day and pays for the food. She says that Cade asked her to check on them. I'm not sure what the purpose of this was. Back at Cade's house, Zeta gets a headache, so he gives her aspirin. She very quickly realizes she can understand Cosmo the cat's thoughts after this. Zeta is freaked out at this, and we also see that she's starting to grow a giant pimple on her forehead, which she covers with her hair. Cade is actually treating his customers like human beings at work, which shocks Stace because, Cade teases Stace some more about being a virgin, which is like, this dynamic between them could have been cute, but it's also even more proof that Cade is such a hypocrite because he teased Stace so much more than Stace has ever teased him. Stace eventually snaps that he doesn't understand what Zeta sees in Cade, which annoys him. When Cade gets home, he's surprised to see that Zeta is having a panic attack because she has accidentally made Cosmo and several objects float without knowing how to bring them down. She also finally confesses about hearing Cosmo's thoughts. When she finally calms down, everything stops floating. Zeta gives Cade a letter to give to Stace requesting time off from modeling. When he wonders why, she lies and says it's just to clear her head. They're both being dishonest about how nervous they are over Zeta's developing powers. The next chapter is a backstory on Stace, where we learn that he grew up broke as hell and raised by his grandfather. He was bullied for being poor and never got to have friends. Cade meets with Stace over burgers to give him the letter from Zeta, so Stace says that he can give her 2 weeks. When Cade delivers this news to Zeta, she seems upset by this, telling him 2 weeks is not enough time. Cade is like, bitch, how do you know it's not enough time? But Zeta lies and brushes him off. He's like, okay, then why do you glow during your sleep? And she lies and says, it's normal during Zodian's sleeping cycles. Later on, Zeta looks at herself in the mirror and sees that she is growing fangs. She sleeps with Cade on the couch that night, but has a terrible nightmare of her and Cade on Zodia. She starts screaming in the dream, and this translates to her waking up and screaming in real life. Cade holds her to calm her down while she's having a panic attack. He confronts her in the morning, but she lies again that she's okay. Huh? I'm sorry, bitch. You're an alien staying in my home. Like, I need the details. Stuff like this potentially involves everyone's safety. If you have these powers you cannot control. You made my fucking cat float in the air. Susie comes back, and then her, Ethan, and Cade decide to throw Zeta a birthday party. Zeta leaves Cade's house to go back to live with Susie. She finally tells Susie everything that happened between her and Cade, and Susie is definitely thinking, huh? Really? Him? Zeta starts to say who she's inviting to her party and ultimately decides to keep it small so she gets minimal attention. Susie thinks this is weird but stays silent, and yet Zeta knows this because she suddenly understands Susie's thoughts. I'm glad a bitch can't read my thoughts because I have intrusive thoughts like a motherfucker. Y'all don't want to know what's going on in there. As a kid, I used to recite the ABCs or numbers randomly in case anyone around me had telepathy. She calls Cade, but only to very vaguely ask if he'd still allow her back home if she were a monster. Cade and Susie all know something is off and discuss Zeta's impending birthday party at work. Stace overhears their conversation, learning about the party, but obviously that he isn't invited. This gets him fired up to make his move on Zeta before it's too late. He calls Zeta to ask if he can take her out to dinner this weekend, and she doesn't realize that it's a date, so she says yes. Later on, when she's hanging out with Sherry and Susie, they inform her dumbass that he means it as a date. I'm not sure that this comic passes the Bechdel test. I think they always end up talking about men at some point. I could be wrong though, but I am glad to see that, the women have friendships and hang out. Anyway, Zeta still thinks it's a nice idea to go, though she doesn't want to make Cade angry. Meanwhile, Cade and Ethan are shopping for Cade to get a nice outfit to wear for Zeta's party. Bitch, and they pick out the most basic outfit. Like, are we really making an effort here? They bump into Stace because world's smallest town, honestly. Stace tells him that he's going on a date and runs away before saying with who. Stace starts to feel uneasy and messages Zeta to move their date up to that day. She still agrees to go, and it's decided that Susie will hide incognito in case Zeta needs help. The restaurant ends up being very fancy, so Susie's not sure how she's even going to get in. Like, girl, did you not see it when you put it in the GPS? It's odd that Susie remarks in her head that the restaurant takes reservations weeks in advance, but Stace was able to move his reservation up to that very day after seeing Cade. When Stace shows up, he doesn't recognize Susie because of her amazing disguise, so she sneaks away and somehow ends up finding a date that will take her into the restaurant. They get seated, and she immediately tells the new girl she's only there to watch her friend, but her girl is okay with that. Back to Stace and Zeta. She orders a ton and then interrogates him about why he wanted to take her out. She's trying to focus, but she hears everyone's thoughts in the restaurant. Stace says he has a special gift for her. He takes her to an outside table that he reserved. I don't understand why they sat at an indoor table and then moved to an outdoor table and I guess a special area just for them. If this restaurant was so expensive and exclusive, then this outside area must have been crazy expensive. I'm concerned if this is even in a photographer/retail manager's budget. Because honestly, Stace be spending tons of money, and I don't know. Anyway, Zeta immediately asks if his intentions are romantic because she can obviously see how much effort he's put in. Stace has put a lot of emphasis on price in his thoughts. Having grown up core, he feels like this is the best way to show love and interest. She starts with the "we can be friends" rejection speech, and he notices that he's getting turned down before even asking. He walks away to light a cigarette on the balcony. Zeta stands up to comfort him, but then suddenly her head starts hurting badly. He reaches out to help her, but her pimple horns that were there before now pop up a lot bigger, and Stace is shocked to see it. He's like, "Oh my god, your face." People have said the same to me when I wake up. In his shock, he falls off the balcony. Zeta freaks out, and the power in the restaurant goes out. Susie leaves her date to find Zeta amidst the chaos. Zeta uses her newfound floating abilities to save Stace from falling and bring him back up. Stace immediately starts freaking out, but she confesses to being an alien. He's like, "Wow, that's why your ID was fake. That's why you and Kate are so suspicious. Blah, blah, blah." And she very nervously admits to everything. He looks at her and thinks that she looks kinda horrifying. A few panels later, we see Stace bump into Susie and tell her that Zeta flew away. We skip a few scenes and see Susie, Stace, and Ethan show up at Cade's house to tell him that Zeta is missing. Cade is immediately upset they didn't call him immediately, but they said they just panicked and it's been an hour. They decide to check the woods for her and find that the ship is still there. This means at least she didn't leave the planet outright. I mean, I thought it wasn't functional anymore anyway. Like, I thought it couldn't fly. I thought it crashed. Cade is pissed and turns to Stace and says it's all his fault. Stace didn't do anything wrong. He got shocked at her horns and fell off a balcony. She saved him by floating him back up, and he thought she looked scary, but didn't say it. Like, my guy was probably feeling so many emotions by going from, "Damn, I'm being rejected, I'm the only girl I've ever liked," to "Holy shit, I'm dying," to "Wait, I'm saved, wait, she's a fucking alien." They look until the morning when they decide that they need to get rest and hope Zeta turns up at either Susie or Cade's house. Zeta, meanwhile, rests at a playground. She wakes up that morning to a child asking her if she's the Tooth Fairy. Zeta replies that she is, and the child gives Zeta a tooth that she just so happened to have and calls her beautiful before leaving. Zeta spends some time wondering if she's pretty or terrifying to the world. Like, join the club, bitch. We all have our ugly days. We finally get another flashback of Zeta as a child on her home planet, where we see another child sneaking to find Zeta in isolation and asking her to come play. The child runs off screaming after seeing Zeta's horns. Her caretaker, who is named Zara, everything on Zodia must begin with a Z, comes in and chastises Zeta for talking to outsiders. She calls Zeta's pimple horns a thorny crown that gives her great power but puts the entire family in danger, so she must hide them. She specifically says that outsiders find her horrifying, so this situation with the child was an exact parallel to what happened with Stace in Zeta's mind. Zeta eventually flies to Cade's house and finds him waiting for her. He tries to catch up to her, but she runs into his room and locks the door. He tries to give her space by letting her be and making pancakes, then texts the others that she's with him. Meanwhile, Zeta is thinking about how she's such a burden. This results in her trying to sneak out the front door. Cade catches her and says, "So that's it, you're just gonna leave with no goodbye. You're not going to explain anything to me," and that's where the chapter ends. Okay, so a few more chapters released while I was making this video, so here's a recap of those two. Cade begs Zeta to talk to him and reassures her that she will always be his Zeta no matter what. She finally shows him her horns and starts having a panic attack about how she can't fit in on Earth anymore and will have to leave, but Cade kisses her and reassures her that they will work it out. Zeta apologizes for not being honest, and I don't know, because Zeta rarely ever gives a sincere apology, and she goes straight into forcing him to accept it. She finally starts giving backstory, so her horns would grow and her family would harvest the gems that sprout from it. Zeta begged her family to learn to fly, and otherwise she spent every day in solitude, just watching out her window or studying. Caretaker refused her, and Zeta finally has a mental breakdown. She escapes while everyone is sleeping, including the guards, and tries to fly. She looks down and sees the underneath, which she was always told was nothingness, but when her flying skills don't pan out, she falls into the underneath, and it seems like a village. A lady starts to chastise her about being on her lawn, and then pleads for forgiveness as she realizes from Zeta's clothes that she must be from the royal family. This person tells Zeta that the gems from her crown are not necessary for the planet's survival, which is what Zeta was told, and she was lied to. Zeta tells this person everything, and she vows to help Zeta learn to fly. My review will be in 3 parts. Let's just get that out of the way. This is not me saying I can do better, but the same way I can criticize food despite not being able to cook, that is what I'm doing by reviewing this comic. This work is better than what I could do. I can't even stick to making a comic at all. That does not make it above criticism. We will be discussing art too, which is similar to discussing the writing style of a book. It is no different and not an off-topic subject, so here we go. Visuals. The art for Down to Earth definitely feels inexperienced. The anatomy leaves a lot to be desired, and this goes beyond stylistic choice. There are artists who choose to have highly stylized bodies. This artist clearly wants to depict hourglass figures. Unfortunately, we can tell the difference between when something is intentionally stylized versus when it falls short due to lack of technical skill. Zeta has absolutely ridiculous proportions with the skinniest chicken legs and widest hips. She looks like she couldn't support her own body weight. Visually, this is a 5 out of 10, with 5 being dead average. Story. The story goes at a snail's pace. I wrote these notes and they ended up way too long, not because too much happens, but rather nothing happens. So everything is important when nothing is important. For almost the entire run of the comic, I'm not sure that there's a story at all. We touched on this before, but nothing would change if Zeta were a foreign exchange student versus her being an alien. It should not take 180 chapters to get to the fucking point or learn her backstory. Zeta is not some complex character. There's also no mystery we're trying to figure out or piece together because we have nearly nothing to work with. Narratively, we're supposed to root for Zeta and Cade, but I have no idea why I would. Cade is not ready for a relationship or a situationship. He's barely let his breakup with Ellie get cold before jumping in with another woman, when we realize he's been using relationships as an unhealthy coping mechanism. And yes, that's why he said they can't be together, but this is still our main couple and we're supposed to hope they beat the odds. This comic takes place between like 3 locations, which is fine, but we're constantly just going from work, home, work, home. We jump scenes so frequently. And then when you realize we don't need 90% of the mindless dribble that happens, it becomes more obvious how haphazard this is. And I just have to point out how incredibly unrealistic it is that Cade can afford to rent a house and support 2 people plus a cat on a Spencer's paycheck. What is this capitalist propaganda? There ain't no way he can do that. There's so many characters that add nothing. Dustin, Cade's mom, even Sherry, the makeup artist, feel out of place. The scenes involving these characters can be removed entirely or replaced with someone else, and nearly nothing changes, especially Cade's mother. And when I was making this, I really felt like me just saying what happens, I'm like, damn, it sounds like I'm constantly just cutting from scene to scene to scene, place to place. Okay, at work, this happens, and then at home, this happens, and now we're at work, and this happens. But that's just how the story reads. The story is a solid 3 out of 10. I'm someone who loves slice of life, but you need to give more compelling characters to make it work. This entire thing reads like I'm going from point A to B, and that's it. Characters! Oh bitch. Let's start with Zeta. I am so annoyed at how Zeta is acting because yes, girl, you're traumatized, blah blah, but you are literally putting yourself and everyone else in danger. And she's selfishly flown so many times, like how badly you say you want to fit in, then you do shit like that out in the open and you keep all these secrets. They need to know what they're getting into. You almost killed Stace, even if accidentally, and then you just run away because he had a negative thought? Because we get no snippets of her life as a Zodian or her customs, we essentially see her as an alien slim thick toddler. She's always in a position of learning very basic things and never teaching or having independence. If we simply had more information on her as a person before landing on Earth, we could have portrayed her as much more knowledgeable. And I get that she wants to keep her secrets, but she's not a mastermind, so certain things would just slip out. But Zeta has no knowledge on anything. Zeta's snooping is very briefly touched on whenever it happens. Cade always lashes out, but that's the end of it. We see no real reflection from her or consequences. It feels like the story and community gloss over how much of a flaw this is, especially since Zeta is so private, but she has no problem taking that agency away from someone else. Now, I love a good flawed character, but it doesn't feel like anyone, even Zeta or the author, is aware of how big of a flaw this is. It doesn't feel acknowledged outside of Cade, and he usually ends up apologizing for being upset. If we wanted to show the effects of her snooping without having her directly reflect on it, we could show Cade dealing with his trust being violated. We could tie that back emotionally to how Delilah made him feel. This would cause Zeta to realize she really did fuck up because she caused him to take a step backwards. Zeta, overall, is Walmart Starfire. We're too lazy to really give her any characteristics that differentiate her from humans, so she talks a little funny, even though she did longer telepathy and should know complete proper English. We're supposed to have sympathy for the things she's self-conscious about. Bitch, you have pointy ears, shut the fuck up. I'm so sick of colored hair, pointy ears, unique eyes being things that are treated like huge flaws, when in reality, bitches love pointy ears, colored hair, unique eyes. Stop being a fucking coward and give your character characteristics that would actually affect how others see them. Zeta has the laziest alien design because the author wanted her to still be attractive. Girl, I fucked a Turian in Mass Effect. Anyone can be attractive if they have Riz. We could have had Zeta have a more unique appearance and an earthly disguise. That would make way more sense why she's so self-conscious about hiding her true self. Right now though, you are a conventionally attractive white model who frankly has never even had a negative reaction about her appearance until you almost killed Stace. Speaking of, let's talk about Stace. Stace has been treated like trash from the author and characters in the story throughout the entire comic, and by the fans if you look at the comments of any of the chapters that Stace is in, and they're literally always talking about kicking his ass. He doesn't deserve to have his ass kicked for shooting a shot with a girl he likes. Zeta and Cade are not even in a relationship. They have not been in a relationship for the entire fucking story up to this point. From Stace's point of view, Cade was a controlling asshole. He constantly sees Cade speak for Zeta, like of fucking course he doesn't think that shit is cool. Wouldn't you have the same thought? You're hanging out with the girl you like and her friend, and he speaks for her and says she can't drink? You're gonna wonder what is going on. He's also never been a bad boss and tried to be friends with both of them. So Cade. The author and the fans of the story will excuse Cade being an asshole to everyone around him because he's depressed. But the moment any other character makes a very minor mistake, it's let's kill them. It's so extremely annoying, and it's the worst part of webtoon comic commons culture. Cade treats his friends like trash over and over again. The only one he defends is Zeta because he wants to have sex with her. He is selfish, and we know the only reason he took Zeta in is because she's allegedly cute. He's extremely sensitive and prone to violent outbursts about a woman he refuses to commit to. He's deep in his depression with no plans of getting out, no therapy, no medication, no real life plan at all. And this may be relatable to some, but Cade is a goddamn character who I'm supposed to read about and hope he romances the alien toddler. No, him and Zeta are not in the same league at all. Zeta at least wants to improve, whereas it took Cade 180 chapters to decide that, though we've gotten no actionable steps. He won't get in a relationship until he's healthy, but what does that mean? How will he know? He's not over his abusive ex, which is fair, but Zeta or any woman doesn't deserve to play second choice. And yet again, the couple we're supposed to want is the same one where the guy said he wants to get back with his ex a handful of chapters ago. And Delilah, what is going on with her? It feels like the author has no idea what to do with her. Zeta continuing to hang out with her is downplaying Delilah's emotional abuse, and it's extremely cruel. Bitch, what are you doing? Delilah has had no depth, but maybe we're in the throes of a redemption arc that feels entirely undeserved. Having Delilah start to be redeemed while Cade is still healing is crazy, and only serves to lessen the impact of Cade's abuse, which in turn lessens the impact of his depression. Susie is my girl. She's a realistic enough depiction of a best friend. I'm confused why I wouldn't root for her to be with Zeta, like my girl has it way more together. Their friendship is really nice too. Either way, Susie and Zeta chapters are way less draining than Zeta and Cade. The romance. I feel like I said my piece here, but you know, I really do think that there needs to be a time skip and separation of the main couple, not due to a misunderstanding, but a mutual agreement. Zeta has no experience with life and is waiting around for a man to get over his ex. Why would I believe their love is even real? He is the first person she met, the first person to be nice to her. She addresses this but doesn't provide any actual reason for why she really loves Cade. If you want us to believe it's real, have her date someone else. We need to see that it's not just about him being the first. Plus, Cade having a healthy relationship with another woman after his years of therapy would be great too. A relationship where he isn't pining after Zeta or Delilah and treats that woman like her own person with no comparisons. Them meeting years later as singles who broke up for different reasons and decide to give each other another try. This, I feel, could be convincing. I will give Cade some props. There are clearly times when he expresses character growth, and I've tried to acknowledge those in this. It would be much more meaningful though if his other, more serious flaws were acknowledged, but it is something. There were also attempts to make Zeta less born sexy yesterday, like having her live with Susie, get a modeling job, and her drawing hobby. Her hobby and job do feel a bit undeserved because there's no struggle. She's naturally good at them, at everything, but it is something. So characters, I'm torn between a 4 or 5 out of 10. There are definitely attempts to flesh them out. It falls short, but I acknowledge that I am a superficial bitch who is definitely harder on them because I dislike the art style. If they were hot, would I change my answer? Almost certainly. I'm part of the problem, so let's say 5 to round it off. So the average score is 4 out of 10. Not painful to read each week, absolutely painful to binge, however. I do not recommend it unless you're an enjoyer of Starfire clones or loser men and you need your next fix. That said, you should still read it yourself to come to your own conclusion and suffer with me. All right, which comic would y'all like to see next? It can be good or bad. Comment below with your recommendation. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you're a true hater, downvote or upvote to really stick it to me. Let me know any thoughts that you guys have on this format or what I can do better, what I can improve, what you'd like to see more of, less of, all that. All right, bye y'all.